So my name's Luke Kysow. I'm a developer here at Hootsuite, and I work on the production operations and delivery team. And for the past, for the past year, I've been working on schedulers. And for the past about 4 months, I've been working on Kubernetes here at Hootsuite. And what I want to talk to you guys about today is about kind of how microservices can really impact your company. And everyone's heard about microservices. And how Kubernetes really helps in making microservices happen, but also how it's not a panacea, and how if you just install Kubernetes and be like, all right, we're done, you're actually not going to get all the value you need and you can get out of microservices. So so everyone's moving to microservices. Well, actually, is everyone? Question, how many people out there are writing microservices? OK, awesome. So there's a lot of good reasons to move to microservices. There's smaller failure domains. There's ability to try out different technologies in small spaces. There's simplification of tech. But one of the biggest reasons to move to microservices is to move faster, to be able to build things a lot faster. Because in a big monolith, you just get slowed down by tech debt, by coordination between people. And if you can work as a small team and you can just bang out a new service in whatever language you want and deploy it to production, you're going to be building things a lot faster. So that's one of the huge promises of microservices. And so that's why Hootsuite, about 2 years ago, started down this road of microservices. And we're super stoked. We're going to do this. And the first thing we ran into was, all right, we want to build a new microservice. Well, which language should we use? Should we use a web framework? How do we organize our code? Which library should we use? What's the version of, what's the best SQL library to use right now? Oh, what about company config? Where's the servers for logging for statsd? And so what we found ourselves doing was basically copying the code from the previous microservice we built into a new repo, and then changing everything, searching and replacing everything, and trying it all out and hoping it works. But the code I copied from was probably my previous microservice, because that was the best. And someone else is copying from a different microservice, and you kind of get this drift of stuff, and you don't necessarily update to the latest versions of everything. So that's the first thing you're going to encounter when you're trying to build these microservices. Then you're off and running again, and immediately you run into your next wall, which is builds. So I have my service, it's running locally, but now I want to build it in automated form. I don't want to just have this building on my laptop. So then you're going to look at something like Jenkins, CircleCI, Travis, or whatever. And because you had your previous microservice that was building through Jenkins, what we did was we just literally copied the jobs over and did a big search and replace. And then it didn't work, and then we asked Bob why his pipeline didn't work, and he's like, oh yeah, that never worked. And you're like, oh god damn it. So then you fix that. And this is happening across the entire organization for every single team. So you get Jenkins working, it's looking good. You start off running again, and then you run into the biggest wall, which is oh right, we actually need to deploy this microservice to production. We need infrastructure. We need a way to route to it, and other people need to route to us. How do we alert if it's down? We should probably check if it's actually healthy, and what happens if the nodes it's on go down, and how do we scale it if it gets popular? And so at Hootsuite, we continually ran into these problems for every single microservice we built. And once we got to this point, we were like, OK, well, let's throw in a bunch of ops. We're on Amazon, so let's throw in a bunch of ops tickets to create servers for every single environment, to create security groups for every single environment. Well, let's figure out how we route to each thing, right? And so the promise of microservices, we were super stoked about it. But in reality, it was taking us minimum of 2 weeks to maximum of a month to a month and a half to actually go from the kickoff to your first deploy of microservice in production. And one of the reasons for this is the old model of ask ops to provision everything doesn't work when you have 100 developers and 10 ops people, and each 100 developers is 5 teams, and each of them are building microservices at minimum every 3 months, right? So that doesn't scale. And so I'm sure that all you guys out there who've done microservices have run into these problems, and I'm curious how long does it take you to go from let's have an idea to do a microservice to let's get it on production? So show of hands, keep your hands up. Is it take you less than 6 months to do that? OK, less than 3 months? Less than a month? Less than 2 weeks? Less than a week? OK, so someone's still up there. OK, a day? Yeah, all right. That's pretty good. So we're all stoked about microservices, but the reality of it is to build a new microservice takes for fucking ever. So we kind of encountered this for a whole year, and we're like, OK, well, what if we could create a tool set that would allow every single team at Hootsuite to build a new service and ship it to production by themselves in 5 minutes or less? No joke, just 5 minutes or less. The service doesn't do anything. It's just a hello world service, but at least they have the whole thing going all the way to production, and they can actually start work writing their code, which is what the whole point of this whole thing was, right? So immediately, like if you're talking about doing this in 5 minutes, everything you write, everything you build has to be self-serve for the teams. So that they can't have, there can be no point along the journey of the pipeline of getting the service to production where they have to wait on someone else. Like actually 5 minutes, I might be out for coffee, right? So there can be no coordination between teams. It has to be all self-serve. And obviously everything has to be incredibly automated. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of the 3 things we did to make this happen. And like the last one's what you're all here for. But I think these ones are also important. And this is kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, where you can't just dump Kubernetes on your developers and be like, OK, we're done. There's a lot of stuff you need to think about. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is about skeleton. So remember that first wall, which is like, which language do you use, and how do you lay out our code, and which frameworks do we use, and which libraries should we use, and what's all the company-specific config, like what's the stats servers that I'm using in different environments. So we just built a really simple project. It's called the skeleton service, and it contains templates for different types of projects you might build. So right now, we contain templates for only 2 languages, Scala and Go. And what you do is you check out the skeleton service. You go in here. You edit a YAML file with the name of your service and some information about it, like which team you're using. And I have a video, so I'll show you that after that. You say generate, and it generates you, some files. And this is a fully running service here. And we got things in here like our Kubernetes config, so our best practices for how we do Kubernetes. We have make files. We have like conf, which points to all the different servers we have. And this is really simple, but it gets you started. It gets you past that first hurdle, and it gets you going. So got a video here of that happening. So I'm checking out the skeleton project here. And then I'm going to copy this YAML file over. I'm just going to start editing it. So the name of this service I'm building here is Kubernetes Meetup. And this video is 2x speed, and it's a minute. So if you keep counting, if I'm promising this 5 minutes to production thing. So fill in a bunch of variables like Slack channels, where we put our alerts, pager teams, which team name we are, so we can track down who owns which service, and the path to our GitHub repo. That's it. That's all you need. There's some other things down here, but they got auto-generated, so I'm not going to fill them in. So that's all you do. And then you generate the service. And then I'm going to cd into that directory. And now I have that skeleton I talked about. And I'm just going to make a simple change here, which is I'm going to change the index endpoint so that instead of returning a hard-coded thing here, it's going to return an environment variable. And I'm going to be using this later to demonstrate no downtime deployments. And then here is some conf for Kubernetes. And I'm just going to add the environment variable here. And then I'm going to just go to the make file. And I'm just going to run the service. So here it's getting all the dependencies. It's running on port 8080. And I got to pause it because, OK, so, oh, no. Yeah. OK, so then basically what it was showing was that I curled the service on port 8080, and it returned the response. So now you have like a fully running service, and it's working all on your laptop. So that's the first part there, the skeleton service. Really simple. Like you guys can build that for your company overnight, but it makes a big impact. And as you feed in best practices like library upgrades, or we want to do this, you can update that skeleton, and every service is coming from that skeleton. It's getting cut from like the best version of everything. So the next wall was builds with Jenkins. So previously, we were just copying Jenkins jobs over. So Jenkins actually has this thing called a Jenkins pipeline. And all it is basically defining your pipeline, your Jenkins jobs, as code. And Travis CI already has this, Circle CI already has this. So this is super simple. The steps to build a service at Hootsuite are basically like compile it, test it, package it to a Docker image, deploy it to an environment, integration test it. So it's pretty easy to template. And so we did. So we put it inside the skeleton project here. And it just gets auto-generated. This isn't the exact thing that gets generated, but it just auto-generates the stages here, and then for your service. And so what I'm going to show is that next step. So the service is running on my laptop. I'm like, OK, sweet. Let's check it into a Git repo. So I think I have to click. Yeah. So here I'm just doing git init. I'm committing, initial commit. I'm going to create a new repo. I'm going to push this to the repo. And Jenkins understands GitHub organizations now. And it's actually going to detect. I'm going to tell it to scan Luke Kysow, the organization. it's going to detect a new repo was created, Kubernetes Meetup, and boom, it's already building it. It's already got the Jenkins file in there. It already compiles. It already works. And I'm actually going to build it now without anything. It's just going to do it automatically, which is a bit dangerous, which is why we have a step here, like, are you sure you want to do it? So this is building the service that I just created, and it's deploying it to all 3 environments. So we're going to wait for it to deploy to dev here. 13 seconds, deploy to staging. It's going to ask me, do you want to deploy to production? And I say yes. And now that's the output, and I'm going to show you the Slack channel. The output's like, hey, I'm running it. So there, right there, those pods that were created, that's the service in production. So that was 2 videos, double X speed, and each one was 2 minutes. So that's 4 minutes, and you're now in production. So now I want to talk the next part there, which was like, how do we actually get to production? I gotta focus off of this one here. Okay, so that's the final wall, which is the biggest one, right? It's like, well, okay, how do I get actually to production? So, you know, if we want to do this in less than 5 minutes, you got to have on-demand infrastructure. I got to be able to ask, hey, run my app, and it's just got to say yes. I can't wait for things to spin up. Luckily, Kubernetes does this beautifully. So in Kubernetes, to run that app I was showing you, that Go app, all you need to say is, I want a deployment. It's called this. I want 1 replica, so this is how many instances are running. This is the image that gets built by Jenkins, like the Docker image, and I'm running on port 8080. And the environment variables that you saw me edit. What you do is we actually generate these YAML files for you in the skeleton service. And you just like use kubectl apply -f, your YAML, and it just presents it to the cluster, and the cluster's like, okay, don't worry, I got it from here. I'm going to provision on the right nodes. If you have more than one, I'm going to split them across availability zones. I'm going to set everything up for you, and boom, you're already running. I'm going to spin up the Docker image, and you're done. So that's the first part, is on-demand infrastructure. So this was like, previously we were like putting in ops tickets to get servers in Amazon, right? And so this is different. And the second thing you need is service discovery and routing. So your app's running, that's great, but how do I call the other apps like that I need for my stuff, and how do they call me? Because the reason I put this app up there was so that people could call my app, right? And luckily, Kubernetes also has this handled. So when you deploy your app in the deployment, you can also specify a service. And what a service does is it basically gives you a DNS entry with the name of your service, or whatever you want to call it. It gives you a static IP that Kubernetes behind the scenes is routing to the replicas, the pods, that are actually running your service. And when you do a deployment, these pods are going to change, right? Because you're updating the Docker image, you got everything new. But this service IP and this DNS entry are going to remain the exact same. And Kubernetes is just going to load balance over your pods. It's going to do that deployment for you, and it's going to give you the newest version. And so this guy can just hard code in his conf, Kubernetes-meetup is always going to be the domain name that I need to hit. So now you have your infrastructure, your app's running, and you automatically, immediately have the ability to call that app. And so what I got is, and so there's a couple other things you usually want is no downtime deployment, what I talked about, and also self-healing, and Kubernetes does that. So if your pod dies, it's going to bring it back up. And so I just have a video of like kind of running through kubectl and messing around with the app I just deployed to production. So the first thing I'm doing here is listing the pods as part of my app. So, oh God, come on. Yeah, so there's 2 pods, because I asked for 2 for production, because it's got to be HA, right? And yeah, so you see the pods there. So they were spun up 2 minutes ago. And then I'm going to port forward from my local MacBook up to those pods. Yeah, so I'm going to port forward from my laptop up to those pods running in production Kubernetes. And yeah, okay. Well, I curl in a different window. Okay, so now I'm execing into one of the other apps, and I'm going to show you guys how the kubedns works. So here it's going to curl my new app on port 8080, and you see that it's got version 10.0.0.0, but that's based on the environment variable I set. So that's proof that like the service discovery works and the routing works. So now I'm just going to curl this in a loop, and I'm on a different app right now. And then I'm going to mess around with the app. So I'm just going to scale it to 5 replicas. Now, usually, like if you actually wanted to scale your app to 5 replicas, you would edit your conf that says how many replicas, because next time someone does a deploy, if you have this old conf that says 1 replica, it's going to put it back down. But here, I'm just doing it for make it easy here. So I'm just running it from the command line. So now it's going to bring up more pods. This is still curling. Everything's fine here. But if I list the pods, there's 5, right? So it's just 14 seconds ago, it spun up 3 new pods. And I'm going to scale it back down. So this is dangerous because you're scaling, you're deleting stuff. I'm back down to 2 pods here, but I didn't have any errors. And the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to update that version to 2. And you're going to see it do a rolling deployment. So you'll start to see it's going to bring up 1 pod, but it's still got like 2 of the old ones running. So it's kind of going to go back and forth between version 1 and 2 here. And if I'm going to look at the pods here, you're just going to cast the tail end of the deploy, which would add like 1 pod terminating and the other 2 available. And now I'm fully on version 2. And the final thing I'm going to do is that kill a pod, and it's going to bring it back up immediately. So before I could even get there, 5 seconds ago, it already brought up a pod. So that's the self-healing aspect. So that's kind of what we did at Hootsuite. We went through all the problems with microservices, with doing all the deployments, all like this provisioning manually, with like copying service file, from copying Jenkins job to Jenkins job. And we learned from that, and we built this system that developers really like to help them deploy. And I think as like a good example of like did it work is go to the next slide here. So this is the number of, so like guess where we did the service pipeline thing, right? So this is the number of microservices now running at Hootsuite, and right around here is when we got this system up and running. And so we're up at like 30 microservices now over the past year. So it's not like infinite. We have about 800 developers, but I think it's proof that like this ability to do services really fast makes a big difference. And there's a couple reasons for that. So if you're a developer and you know that your next microservice is going to take like a month to do, you might just build that feature on the old one that you already had working, right? It's just faster. So you're less likely to build a new microservice when maybe you should, right? And the other thing is you might be more likely to build it on the monolith, or you might be more likely to build it in a different way. So what we found with this is people are building, like, for a simple service, like a feature, they're actually building 2 microservices. So they're building one that's reading off the event bus and one that's writing to a database. So this kind of idea of microservices where you can actually build small apps that do one thing and do one thing well is realized when you can do this. And so it's an extreme goal to have 5 minutes, but it does make a big difference to your organization. And yeah, if you're interested in working with us on this stuff, we're hiring. And thank you very much. I'm going to take questions now.